Hey, Mate 40 here. So, I don't know what goes on in your head, but I gotta admit, as someone who's not married, doesn't have kids, I spent way too much thinking about what are possible justifications for believing that I am awesome. Because if I just look at the immediate quality of my life, right, my awesomeness is not immediately revealed, right? It's not clear to me when I just look at the facts of my life. How on earth am I going to get to the perspective that this 58-year-old is awesome? So I got to manufacture reasons for why I'm awesome, and God, I wish it wasn't true, but much of the day I spend thinking about why I'm awesome, why I'm superior to other people who do what I do. And so one way that I tried to achieve awesomeness between, say, 2018 and 2020 was bringing on a wide diversity of voices. So you could have Orthodox Jews talking to Nazis, and that was fun, that was shocking, that was compelling. And I thought, wow, I'm really doing something awesome. But then I moved out of that. And now the last 2-3 years, this is how I've been convincing myself that I really am awesome, that I'm really coming with something special and unique, that it's important that you watch my show, and justifying all the effort and the hours and the energy that I put into this show. And my new approach to believing that I'm awesome is that other dissident right rhetoric is moronic, it's stupid, it's silly, it's immature. It fails to grapple with reality. And I am just so much wiser and smarter than all the other people who do what I do. Right? That's what I have to tell myself, to shore myself up, give myself the strength and energy and the commitment to keep doing this and to go through the day thinking that I'm doing something really awesome. So here's a moronic trend that I notice dominating in distant right circles. And that is a lot of meditation on the awesome, terrifying power of the press. And so I'm looking at a new Substack that Steve Saylor follows. It's called Eugippius, a Plague Chronicle. That's the name of the Substack. Once more on the awesome, terrifying power of the press, the purpose and function of their fictions, why they can be so effective even when everybody sees through them. And as you would expect from watching this show, right, the author does not produce any evidence that the press is so effective. He just simply asserts it. He's a lot like the Z blog. And then July 4, he did an original version, this essay, The Awesome, Terrifying Power of the Press. Take a moment to contemplate the awesome and terrifying power of the press. And as I don't think the press are awesome, I don't think they're terrifying. And even though I have some emotional sympathy for Richard Hanania's approach, which is also that much of right-wing discourse is moronic and stupid. So I have some sympathy for his approach that kind of emphasizes how he's an outlier, right? He's the brave truth teller. He's bucking the trends. He's low in agreeableness. But Richard Hanania published an essay about 18 months ago why the press is, good and great, and why you should respect it and follow them. And I thought that was silly too, right? The press, like you, like me, is good at some things, really dumb at other things, right? I don't consider the press to have this awesome, terrifying power. So why on earth do so many people on the right, particularly on the dissident right, think that the press has awesome, terrifying power? One is, I think they're afraid for their reputations, right? They harbor a deep insecurity. They're afraid that if their words were published, that if they were presented in the news media, that they would look terrible, and it would come at a tremendous cost, and it would severely diminish their vanity about how awesome they might be. So that's one theory. But the deeper theory is, I think they have a profound commitment to living in delusion, because that way they get to build up these awesome conceptions about how amazing they are and how valuable the work is doing. And if they weren't being repressed by the awesome, terrifying power of the press, then society would rightly recognize them for the geniuses that they are. And then I think there's another component that if the press and the left-wing hold on institutions is awesome and amazing and unfathomable and unfightable, it provides them with a justification for the passivity of their life and for the lack of success of their life. So instead of facing up to why they haven't achieved as much as they want to achieve, why they may not be as special as they think they are, and why the awesome, terrifying powers of their opponents may not be nearly so awesome and so terrifying, thereby removing their justifications for the ineffectiveness of their life and of their cause, right? They prefer to live in a fantasy world where their opponents are just awesome and terrifying. It's a lot like the Israelites who are commanded by God to go into the promised land, but they are way too scared to do it. And so they build up this conception of the people in Israel, what becomes Israel in the promised land, that they're giants, that they're powerful, they're awesome and terrifying, and they just simply couldn't match up to them, that it's just too frightening to do what God commands. And so they build up the opposition into these giants that they do not deserve. I have been checking out more content from the Bulwark and the Dispatch. Right, these are anti-Trump, centrist to center-right publications, and the Bulwark reports today: has the new right already peaked? The hyper-online culture war fixated democracy skeptical movement known as the new right is on the proverbial march. And here's their critique. Right, begins with the new right's basic understanding of reality. The movement's worldview rests on an insane theory of power. The members of the new right believe that American institutions are dominated by radical leftists who use their power and positions of influence to force their beliefs on an unwilling populace while also suppressing dissent. And so I would modify that to say that most of our institutions are dominated by the center left and the left. I would not say the radical left. And I believe that everyone tries to evangelize for their views. So that radical leftists try to evangelize their views and try to get people to follow their views and try to create an environment around them most conducive to their own thriving does not shock or surprise or dismay me. Like all forms of life do this. It's called niche construction if you want to research it, from beavers to ants to plants. All right, every form of life tries to construct a niche around it that's most conducive to its thriving. A weirdo from the internet named Curtis Yarvin calls this imaginary arrangement the cathedral. I have not found much benefit from Curtis Yarvin. So I've tried to read some of his essays. I've listened to interviews with him, and I just don't get a good ratio of benefit to putting up with nonsense. So I would say that the amount of benefit I get from paying attention to Curtis Yarvin compared to the amount of nonsense that I have to put up with to get to the benefit is something like 1 unit of benefit to every 10 units of nonsense. Okay, the problem with this new right theory of power is not just that it will classify as powerless the United States Supreme Court, all right, which is run by conservative state governments, many of which are run by conservatives, market-dominating media outlets, churches, most of the business community, and many other right-leaning American institutions. Okay, so I take issue with this assessment. Many of these institutions, particularly mainstream churches, are under center left, right? But it encourages adherents to believe that their ideas have widespread appeal and that the only reason their ideas aren't dominant is that right-wing viewpoints are being erased from the public discourse by the people who control it. That conspiratorial belief is without bounds. What's apparently out of bounds is the idea that most Americans really are neutral to positive regarding democracy. True. Because of their grievances and their theory of power, the new right believes its ideas appeal to a silent majority suppressed by powerful left-wing figures. This creates cognitive dissonance that blocks off self-awareness. The more they ensconce themselves in information bubbles to avoid reckoning with the actual opinions and desires of the public, the less they see how far they are from mainstream American opinion. Yeah, so it's good to be part of a strongly identifying in-group. All right, I'm all for living much of life within your in-group, but you also need to take a pause and just contemplate how are the words, how are the actions, how are the behaviors of my in-group, how are they going to come across to people who are not part of my in-group, to people who don't have a partisan perspective. And if you can do that, you can have all the benefits of belonging to a cult, because all in-groups take on many of the characteristics of a cult. And being within a powerfully identifying in-group is a fantastic way to lead a life, but you need to be able to step outside of it at times and reflect, oh, how is this going to look to people who are not part of my in-group? All right, let's get a burst here from Jesse Waters.
It's crazier than a soup sandwich. One president dropped out, the other was shot in the head. Now you've got a female black Democrat campaigning for the white vote and a white Republican guy campaigning for the black vote. And the Hispanics are like, hola, over here. Trump flew to Chicago today for the Black Journalists Convention, first-time Republican nominee to do that in 20 years. Kamala was also invited, but she said she was too busy. But the guy who showed up was treated worse than the woman who ditched.
I want to start by addressing the elephant in the room, sir. A lot of people did not think it was appropriate for you to be here today. You have pushed false claims about some of your rivals, from Nikki Haley to former President Barack Obama, saying that they were not born in the United States, which is not true. You have told 4 congresswomen of color who were American citizens to go back to where they came from. You have used words like animal and rabid to describe black district attorneys. You've attacked black journalists, calling them a loser, saying the questions that they ask are, quote, stupid and racist. You've had dinner with a white supremacist at your Mar-a-Lago resort. So my question, sir, now that you are asking black supporters to vote for you, why should black voters trust you after you have used language like that?
Well, first of all, I don't think I've ever been asked a question in such a horrible manner. First question. You don't even say, hello, how are you? Are you with ABC? Because I think they're a fake news network, a terrible network. And I think it's disgraceful that I came here in good spirit. I love the black population of this country. I've done so much for the black population of this country, including employment, including opportunity zones with Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, which is one of the greatest programs ever for black workers and black entrepreneurs. I think it's a very rude introduction. I don't know exactly why you would do something like that. And let me go a step further. I was invited here, and I was told my opponent, whether it was Biden or Kamala, I was told my opponent was going to be here. It turned out my opponent isn't here. You invited me under false pretense, and then you were half an hour late. Just so we understand, I have too much respect for you to be late. They couldn't get their equipment working or something was wrong.
Mr. President, I would love if you can answer the question on your rhetoric and why you believe that black voters should trust you with another 4 years.
I have been the best president for the black population since Abraham Lincoln. That's my answer.
Better than President Johnson, who signed the Voting Rights Act?
And for you to start off a question and answer period, especially when you're 35 minutes late because you couldn't get your equipment to work in such a hostile manner, I think it's a disgrace.
That moment changed the campaign. Donald Trump ripped the news cycle right out of Kamala's hands. That exchange is going to be...
Okay, so did that moment really decide the campaign? I think you'd have to be part of the MAGA crowd to believe that transformed the campaign. So I noticed that the MAGA crowd think that was awesome, and pretty much everyone else thought it was horrible. I don't have a position. I'm fine with what Donald Trump was saying, given that I'm kind of used to Donald Trump's style. I think the most important question is, did Donald Trump's performance today enhance his odds of winning the presidency of the United States? And all the elite political journalists and commentators seem to say no. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong.
Seen by millions of black Americans. It'll be seen by everyone. And how they react to it will decide the country's future. This is like the Megyn Kelly moment at the debate. Remember, only Rosie O'Donnell. It's going to leave a mark. They say half of life is showing up. Donald Trump showed up. Kamala Harris didn't. Donald Trump didn't have to go to the National Black Journalists Convention in Chicago. What just happened could even cost him votes. But he wanted to go because, as president, he wants to work for them. Kamala not showing up is taking the black vote for granted. If you're invited into someone's house and they disrespect you, doesn't matter who they are, what they look like, black, female, whatever, Trump doesn't tolerate disrespect. And as president, whether you like him or not, whether he makes you feel uncomfortable or not, that's the attitude you want in a leader. Someone who works for your vote and who doesn't allow the country to be disrespected. Might not look pretty, but it works. And his presidency proved that. Mr. Nice Guy Joe Biden and laughing Kamala Harris, politically correct, but cowards, won't stand up for our sovereignty or our safety. So what if Biden and Harris say all the right things and don't make you feel anxious? Country's a mess. Your feelings are the problem. These insecure people are so privileged that they're putting their own personal feelings about a president's vibe over their own countrymen's lives. People are being hurt in America by smooth-talking politicians.
So Kamala Harris hasn't given a press conference since she's become the presumptive Democratic nominee, and I think it's probably highly unlikely that she will give any substantial news conference prior to the vote. I mean, why would she? She has hit it out of the park every day in just purely political terms. All right. There's so much energy behind her. Why? Because she's getting on the same page with her supporters and potential supporters. She's highly scripted, and it seems to be highly effective. And according to mainstream media reports, Donald Trump is losing it. He can't handle campaigning against a black woman. All right, so let's get a little bit here of the conventional wisdom from Mark Halperin earlier today.
Here on Two-Way, this is a platform for long, sophisticated, interesting bipartisan, where he sat with 3 journalists on stage and took questions. We're going to show you some of that. We're going to being discussed, which will dominate today and keep Donald Trump, I would say, no matter what he does at his rally tonight, from winning the news cycle. That has to do with his appearance at the National Association of Black Journalists.
Okay, so Mark Halperin thinks it's important to win the news cycle, and he says, I think correctly, that Kamala Harris has won every news cycle since last Sunday.
Event where he sat with 3 journalists on stage and took questions. We're going to show you some of that. We're going to talk about how that is being digested, and I'm going to have something to say about sort of the macro sense I have of what's going on in the race right now, particularly regarding how the media is viewing things. Also talk about deep stakes. Governor Shapiro, I still believe, is the front runner based on the totality of what I know. He is unique amongst those being considered. I think the field of people being considered is pretty small right now. That he has opposition research coming.
So about 9 days ago, Mark Halperin was all down with, is it Mark Kelly from Arizona as Kamala Harris's running mate? And then about a week ago, he said that vetting had turned up some things that were essentially disqualifying for Mark Kelly. So I wonder what those unsavory things were that disqualified him from being Kamala Harris's VP.
At him, some of it is organic, negative stories done by journalists, investigative stories, but some of it I believe is being ginned up. And there's a massive discussion taking place regarding his religion and regarding his position on Israel and whether he would be a risky pick or not. So we'll talk about that as well. The Middle East situation.
How can Trump win the news cycle when he's hated by the media? Well, Trump won the news cycle for a solid month after the June 27th debate until 10 days ago when Kamala Harris was handed the Democratic nomination. So Republicans still often win the news cycle, right? What is it about the right that just instinctively thinks it's hopeless and helpless? Republicans can never win the news cycle because they're hated by the media. And yet, time and again, you find Republicans winning the news cycle. Maybe it's not as hopeless as you think.
It continues to be extraordinarily fraught, and we can talk about that as well. So let me start by saying, since 2015, the establishment anti-Trump wing of the Republican Party and the entire Democratic Party and the media, while the media has occasionally dabbled with fascination with Trump, has tried to rid the political system of Donald Trump. And they have repeatedly, Charlie Brown in the football, said, this is it. This is the moment where Trump goes down. This is the moment where the country says this person can't possibly be president. He's vulgar, he's racist, he's dangerous, he has no business being in the Oval Office. And anyone who's paid attention has seen that happen over and over again. And there have been times when those things have certainly hurt him. And you hear on this platform all the time, people say they're voting for Trump, but they wish he would shut up, or they wish he would not be so negative or divisive. This time might be different. And I've never said that in the nearly 10 years Donald Trump has been dominating our national conversation. I've always been skeptical. I've always thought that there's a distorted narrative that comes out of the fact that the press doesn't like him and the press loves to listen to the Adam Schiff view of the world. that says this is it. This is when the country turns on Donald Trump. What's different now is a few things. Number one, and again, a lot of this grows out of his event today, but it was true even before his event today. Running against Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden twice is different than running against this version of Kamala Harris. This version of Kamala Harris, if you're honest, even if you're a Republican, is significantly more formidable than Hillary Clinton was in 2016 and Joe Biden.
Yes, and I think that this is accurate from an objective perspective. Right now, Kamala Harris looks electorally formidable.
Was in 2024. Not that they didn't have strengths. They both ran close races, one lost, but they had tons of vulnerabilities. And they had, particularly Hillary Clinton in 16 and Biden in 24, they often did not have the press on their side. The negative narratives, thanks to Jim Comey and others, but also thanks to Hillary Clinton and her reputation with the relationship with the press, and in some cases sexism. She had a lot of bad days. Kamala Harris has not had a single bad day since she took de facto took the nomination. And this is a really short campaign. And that's the other big.
Right. Short campaign, and people shine in different situations. Right. Kamala Harris, in a highly scripted campaign run by smart, tough, effective people, may very well run an amazing campaign. And she'll avoid going off script, and she'll avoid hostile questioning. And this might be the winning formula for her. I don't think she'll be a great president of the United States, but she has a 40% chance, I still hold by that, of winning the presidency.
Difference. Kamala Harris can run the table here and not have a bad day for 90 days, I believe, in part because the press is rooting for her, and in part because the forces in both parties and in the media that have wanted to stop Donald Trump.
So Mark Halperin thinks that because the press is rooting for her, that this is an important factor that could very well be the difference maker for her winning the election. Right. I don't believe winning news cycles and having the press rooting for you is going to sway more than 0.1% of the vote. So Scott McConnell, former editor of the American Conservative magazine, he wrote a column today that the news media will account for about 5% swing in voter opinions, right? Swinging voters away from the natural predilections in the favor of the Democrats, right? I don't believe it.
Can now see the project. They can now see what Vice President Harris needs to do, what they need to do to stop Donald Trump. And partly what's fueling the confidence and the determination and the focus is Donald Trump, since the switch from Biden to Harris, has not been running a very good campaign. Now, some of that's overblown.
So maybe his performance at the National Association of Black Journalists is not good for his campaign. I don't know, right? I'm not as turned off by it as members of the news media.
Some of the criticism of his team, I think, is a little bit overblown, but even Republicans will say they were caught flat-footed, that they still don't really have a theory of the case about how they're going to slow her down. They're not panicking, but there's deep concern in Trump circles about trying to figure this out. Now, I want to show you something that Nate Silver tweeted. Nate Silver, I find useful often to be kind of the embodiment of the spirit of the anti-Trump forces in America. And what he said is, see it there, every poker player is seen as a player who has a huge stack and is coasting to lock up a big night, but then loses a big pot, goes on tilt, and never regains his form. And some of Trump's latest moves remind me of that. This was before the NABJ event. And what that tweet represents is this view that, sure, Trump had a great run legally, politically, with Biden's fading in the debate. Trump had a great run and was in a masterful position. But since Kamala Harris became the de facto nominee, that he's showing that he's a loser. He's showing that he's weak. He's showing that his capacity to win this election is minimal. And that sentiment is infusing. Go watch an hour, as I did right before I joined you. I watched the top of the 4 o'clock at MSNBC and CNN. It is infusing the sensibility, and it will infuse the so-called straight news coverage in the major.
Yeah, and how many votes will be shifted by this straight news coverage? I wager effectively none. But Mark Halperin and I think anyone else listening to me right now disagrees with me.
Papers today and every day when they can say this about Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump's event, interviewed by 3 journalists on stage in Chicago. I'd never heard him once say Kamala Harris was an San Francisco extremist. I never heard him once talk about, I didn't hear him talk with a focus on inflation and immigration. I didn't hear him talk about her role in the administration. What I heard him say, and what's going to get all the attention, is some stuff that is classic Trump. Now, maybe there's some method to the madness, and this is going to help him win the election. Because once again, the dog whistle is going to be louder than what's going to be printed in the New York Times tomorrow. But I want to show you the soundbite that's getting the most attention. And you can make of it what you will and say it's not as negative for Americans as the rate of inflation under Biden-Harris. But I guarantee you that it costs them the news cycle and probably more. Go ahead and play it, please.
A little bit different. So I've known her a long time indirectly, not directly very much. And she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She has always
But you know
identified
what?
as a black woman.
I
She went to a
respect
historically
either
black
one.
college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn, and she became a black person.
Just to be clear, sir, do
And
you
I
believe
think,
that
I think
she is
somebody should look into that too when you continue in a very hostile, nasty tone.
It's a direct question, sir. Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is a DEI hire, as some
I really
Republicans
don't
have
know.
said?
I mean, I really don't know. Could be. There are some, and there are plenty. I know this lady right over there, Harris, is a fantastic person who just interviewed me at length, and we had a great interview, I think, and I heard you got very good ratings on that
Well, you
interview.
told me it was the longest one of your life, so we had a good discussion.
Okay. All right. We can drop out of that.
Here today.
So is that as offensive as saying Barack Obama was not born in the United States and is illegitimate? Is it as offensive as some of the things he said about?
Right, I don't find it mildly offensive. All right, I just find it a hilarious observation. So I'm sure it plays well with Trump's base. How does it play to that tiny number of undecided voters? Right, so part of this has to do with the careful critical discourse that dominates the new class, that dominates the elite. That careful critical discourse does not allow for that kind of frank observation. All right, elite, Harvard-educated people are going to frown and be dismayed by this, type of observation, just like they were dismayed by observations that Joe Biden was senile. So it was a little bit rude, perhaps, a little bit vulgar by new class standards, but to me, it was a funny observation that has the ring of truth.
Secretary Clinton. It's not, I don't think, but it's offensive to people and it's not on message. And it is, if I may use the word.
Yeah. Is it offensive to Trump voters? No. Is it offensive to voters on the fence? Possibly. Particularly those with a university education.
Weird. And it is going to get the confidence of Blue America and the dominant media to say, this guy's lost his mind. He's scrambling. It was already denounced from the White House podium using.
Oh, wow. Oh, I didn't realize he'd been denounced from the White House podium. Oh, my gosh. And really, I mean, anyone who gets offended by that, gets offended by J.D. Vance's comment that this country is run by barren cat ladies. All right. These are people who are looking to feel offended.
Extraordinarily strong words, which I had in front of me. Let me see if I can find them again. And I think what you're going to see is, let me just get it up here. The White House press secretary takes to call those comments repulsive and insulting. Okay, so
I find that a repulsive and insulting exaggeration and overstatement to a humorous observation.
So I think what you're going to see now is a round of polling, which we've already seen some of that shows Vice President Harris doing very well. You're going to continue to see her doing strong events because they're very managed, and the team in place, amongst the many things that she's benefiting from by being the nominee as opposed to anyone else after Joe Biden stepped aside, is she's got an advanced team that knows how to do presidential and vice presidential level events. Had someone else come in and tried to build a presidential campaign, it just wouldn't have been possible. She's staging, as she did yesterday in Atlanta, very strong events. She's not doing interviews yet. She's not doing press conferences yet. I'm not predicting she'll win, and I'm not cheering for her to win. But what I'm telling you is that performance by Donald Trump today will provide another news cycle where that Nate Silver sensibility will be dominant in the media and be dominant in Democratic circles that says, this guy is losing, and therefore he's losing his mind. Now, as I said, it's been predicted many times before.
So are those who possess the new elite's culture of careful critical discourse, are they all right? Are these incredibly offensive comments by Donald Trump? I just don't see it, but I don't see a lot of things. All right, I'm just one bloke who has delusions about how amazing and awesome his insights are, and my mind is just programmed to look for ways for why my podcast is superior to every other podcast. My commentary is superior to all other commentary. that my insights are deeper and broader and wider and sharper and smarter and funnier than all other insights. So, of course, I got all sorts of delusions.
In that moment, Trump's not worried, does this hurt me politically? He's defending his honor. He's doing what he thinks is right because his policies benefited the black community more than Biden-Harris's. He doesn't care if you call him rude or racist if he knows he's doing what's right. This country's in too bad of shape to be so sensitive. Black communities are furious that Kamala Harris, a black woman, flooded their neighborhoods with migrants and showered the foreigners with welfare. And she didn't show up today.
My message is to stop people from invading our country that are taking, frankly, a lot of problems with it. But one of the big problems, and a lot of the journalists in this room I know and I have great respect for, a lot of the journalists in this room are black. I will tell you that coming from the border are millions and millions of people that happen to be taking black jobs. You had the best.
What exactly is a black job, sir?
Yeah, it's such a profound question. I mean, what exactly is a black job? I think Axios reported there's no such thing as a black job. It's shorthand, right? Donald Trump speaks off the cuff. There are some jobs that are dominated by Ashkenazi Jews. There are other jobs dominated by South Asians, all right? It seems to me that many South Asians tend to own and operate 7-Eleven stores, right? Other jobs are dominated by people from West Africa, all right? Jobs in rhetoric, jobs in improvisation, such as comedy, or in the National Football League, or in soccer, or the National Basketball Association, or in acting, right? There are vast areas of popular culture that are overwhelmingly dominated, disproportionately dominated, out of all proportion compared to the general population, right? You have certain areas of the economy dominated by people of West African descent, not people from Central Africa, not people from North Africa, not people from East Africa. People from West Africa enjoy disproportionate success throughout many sports in America and through much of popular culture in America. Other fields are dominated by Ashkenazi Jews, not Sephardic Jews, not Mizrahi Jews, not Presbyterians, right? They're dominated by one tribe, Ashkenazi Jews, the news media, entertainment, parts of academia, parts of finance. All right. Professors at elite universities tend to be disproportionately Jewish, as opposed to, at least traditionally, for Catholic professors, right, were much more likely to be at second-rate colleges and to have, a much lower percentage at the elite universities. So your drug dealer, right, probably is not a Presbyterian, right? So certain groups dominate crack sales. Other groups dominate marijuana sales. Other groups dominate prostitution. Other groups dominate the pornography industry. Other groups dominate janitorial positions, right? African Americans are disproportionately employed in janitorial and in service industries, along with Latinos. So it's not part of the culture of careful critical discourse to talk about black jobs, but effectively we all know what are black jobs. And generally speaking, the worlds of high finance and physics and economics, right, are not dominated by people of West African descent.
A black job is anybody that has a job. That's what it is. Anybody that has a job.
All right.
And
Mr. President,
they're taking the employment away from black people. They're coming in, they're invading. It's an invasion of millions of people, probably 50.
Right. So if these Latino immigrants just happen to have slightly higher IQs than African Americans, and say if they have a lower propensity to commit crime, then many employers are going to prefer to employ them rather than African Americans. Also, once someone gets their foot in the door and starts establishing power in a job, such as in the U.S. Secret Service, right? Throughout the U.S. Secret Service, Latinos overwhelmingly prefer to staff their details with other Latinos, right? They help other Latinos. They cover up for other Latinos. People from the South, white people from the South in the Secret Service like to hire other white people from the South. Catholics like to hire other Catholics. People of Irish or Italian descent like to hire their own kind.
15, 16, 17 million people. I have a feeling it's much more than that. And everybody's been seeing what's happened. The first group of people, the black population, is affected most by that, and Kamala is allowing it to happen.
Could Kamala Harris sit in front of an audience like that, a black audience, and justify pumping millions of migrants into their streets? They're not putting migrant shelters in the white dudes for Harris neighborhoods. They're putting them in the south side of Chicago. But the ABC reporter didn't want to listen and kept interrupting him. And Trump was a pretty good sport, even after they kept him waiting 30 minutes and couldn't get the audio straight.
First of all, it's very hard to hear you for whatever reason because of the fact that they have bad equipment, because I guess, you know, this woman was unable to get the right equipment. But it's very hard for me to hear you, but I can hear every other word. It's very difficult, actually. I won the case, and it got very little publicity. I didn't notice ABC doing any publicity on it, George.
We covered you extensively, sir. I'd love to move over on to different topics.
I didn't notice you do any publicity on it at all. I won the case, the biggest case. This is an attack on a political opponent. I have another one where I have a hostile judge.
We have you for a limited time, sir. I'd love to move on to different topics.
Excuse you. You're the one that held me up for 35 minutes, just so you understand.
We didn't know what was next.
Yeah.
And 2 days after that,
I cannot understand. Your microphone
I know,
is so
it is really hard for me to
it's
understand
just,
you too.
I can understand you perfectly.
Because she's closer.
I can understand you.
Happy to hear that, sir.
But I can't
really
understand.
He's still quick. He's still funny. I think he conducted himself pretty well. And I wonder if they deliberately gave Harris Faulkner inferior audio equipment because they knew that she'd ask friendlier questions.
I have a few more questions.
Because of the distance, and the mics are really in lousy shape.
In between technical difficulties, Donald Trump was asked about Kamala Harris and DEI, a political minefield for politicians, but Trump shut his eyes and waltzed right in.
Republicans on Capitol Hill have labeled Vice President Kamala Harris, who is the first black and Asian American woman to serve as vice president and be on a major party ticket, as a DEI hire. Is that acceptable language to you? And will you tell those Republicans and those supporters?
Oh, is that acceptable language? That's part of that culture of careful critical discourse where the nature of the language is what's at issue. She didn't ask if that's true. She asked if that language is acceptable, right? That's her concern, whether language is acceptable or not, if it differs from the culture of careful critical discourse. But just simply noting that Joe Biden has moments of senility, that's not part of the culture of critical discourse. It's not the way that the elite are supposed to speak. What an interesting way that she framed it. Is that acceptable? Well, if it's true, it should be acceptable.
To stop it.
How do you define DEI? Go ahead. How do you define
diversity, equity, inclusion?
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Is that what your definition?
That is
give me a
literally
definition then. Would you give me a definition
DEI.
of that? Give me a definition of that.
Sir, I'm asking you a question,
No,
a
you
very
have to
direct
define
question.
it. Define it for me, if you would.
I just defined it, sir. Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is only on
No, she didn't define it. Simply saying 3 words, diversity, equity, inclusion, doesn't define it.
the ticket because she is a black woman?
Well, I can say, no, I think it's maybe a little bit different. She was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She has always
But you know
identified
what?
as a black woman.
I
She went to a
respect
historically black college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a black person.
Just to be clear, sir, do you believe that she is
somebody should look into that too when you continue in a very hostile, nasty tone.
It's a direct question, sir. Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is a DEI hire, as some Republicans have said?
I mean, I really don't know. Could be, could be.
Would Jesse Waters have answered the question that way? Probably not. Is this going to help the Trump campaign? I don't know. No idea. At this point, we don't know how this plays, but people are going to be talking about it for months, and Johnny's going to be there for that. Trump touched a nerve with the media, that we know.
It's probably some of the most disgusting rhetoric I've heard.
Wow, if that's disgusting, then what would it be to say some, very detailed anatomical fantasies about your mother? I mean, that was vile to me. It was a funny, realistic observation. To be disgusted and horrified by that remark. I mean, Kamala Harris does not look black. Obama does not look black, right? Both Barack Obama and Kamala Harris could pass as exotic. All right, they choose to identify as black, and Kamala Harris does not lead with "I'm black." All right, she has not made it a focus of her political life, to the best of my knowledge. Just trying to constantly lead with blackety, blackety, black.
Heard at the presidential level that Donald Trump believes that he is the arbiter of what it means to be black.
He didn't suggest that at all. He just takes it for granted that Kamala Harris has not led with blackety, blackety, black, I'm black, black, black. She has frequently talked about being of Indian descent.
In the United States.
This was offensive. This was ignorant. This was graceless.
Offensive, ignorant, graceless? It was a humorous aside. It was a humorous observation. If you are up in arms about this, then you're choosing to be offended. I've never been offended in my life by anyone's political or cultural comedy or commentary.
Came to use them as a backboard to score with the MAGA crowd to say, I'm one of y'all. I will go to their own conference and do everything but call them the N-word.
Does the media talking about Kamala's race help or hurt Kamala's campaign? We'll see. Kamala's mother's Indian and her father's Jamaican, and she's referred to identity in different ways in her political career, which makes no difference at all to me, but maybe it does to African Americans. I have no idea. These are uncharted waters. Trump told Kamala, you ain't black. All Democrats want to do is talk about identity, and when Trump talks about identity, they go nuts. They say DEI is great, and when you say you're a DEI hire, they say you can't say that. This proves Trump's not afraid of Kamala Harris and is not going to avoid issues. He's going to confront them. He's not going to change, even after dodging an assassin's bullet. The week after the attempt on his life, in the first 20 minutes of his RNC speech, when he held the country in the...
Okay, so most people would have been terrified to make that observation that Donald Trump made. I think it was ballsy. Whether it helps him or not, different question. All right, looking at Steve Saylor's blog, he's asking his readers if he should do a deep dive into Kamala Harris's background like he did with Barack Obama in 2007. In the comments section, my favorite corrupt story about Willie Brown, right? Kamala Harris got her start in politics as Willie Brown's mistress, right? Willie Brown had a wife, was married, and Kamala Harris was his girlfriend. Right, my favorite corrupt story about Willie Brown was when the president of San Francisco City College, an ex-Willie Brown girlfriend, started an online school. She hired a headhunter who was also an old Willie Brown girlfriend. To head the online department, the headhunter hired a third ex-girlfriend of Willie Brown. I have to think that almost all the female politicians in the Bay Area who between 45 and 65 probably got their start being his girlfriend. Okay, so I'm reading this new Substack that I've never seen before. EUGYPPIUS, Eugippius. And this is how he describes his work. We are witnessing an unprecedented, comprehensive failure of policy, medicine, and science. The world will never be the same. So apparently he got started in the COVID era. And my perspective on the COVID era is that our elites and our public health authorities and our medical establishment did a better than average job responding to an unprecedented challenge in 100 years. Not a terribly exciting position. He, on the other hand, thinks it's just absolutely outrageous that this is like the worst thing ever. And that's why he got started with his blog. So he says, this blog was born as running commentary on the corona pandemic, and that remains an important focus. My guiding thesis is that the excesses of the response, and whenever you respond to anything, you'll always have excesses, right? You cannot respond without at times being in excess. from unending lockdowns, which I think overall in toto were a good thing, saved hundreds of thousands of lives, to mask mandates, which I believe were often a good thing, but I will admit that the evidence is not clear that mask mandates are a great idea. And mass vaccination, which I believe the evidence is clear was a good idea, reflect the deeper social, cultural, and political pathologies that arise from late-stage post-war liberalism. Right, this is just a classic new right perspective. Right, I think our response to COVID reflect that our institutions are better than average in responding to an unprecedented situation like this pandemic. Now, what I don't see on his Substack is him describing other societies where things are just so much better. You can always find problems with those who have power over you. That is the easiest task in the world, right? Make live streams, do blogs, create social media commentary, complaining about those in power. That is just the easiest thing. Everybody has ambivalence and some negative feelings about people who have power over them. So it's just easy to whip up hysteria about those in power. It's just a reflex that is popular, but if it is not considered, it is dumb and paranoid and reflects someone who does not want to live in reality, because he complains a great deal about Western institutions, but where exactly are they better, right? Compared to an idyllic perception of how institutions should operate, you can find all sorts of problems with American institutions. But we don't live in an ideal state. We live on planet Earth. Where on planet Earth are institutions better? I mean, plenty of people on the new right, the distant right, say that we have it worse in the United States than people did under Soviet communism, that we have it worse than North Korea. This is just an insane perspective by people far removed from reality. So he blogs on and on and on about deeper social, cultural, and political pathologies that arise from late-stage post-war liberalism. But where is it better, right? Where do you have better social, cultural, and political operations? What systems are better than post-war liberalism, right? Show me. Is life so much better in Nigeria, North Korea, China, Russia? Right? Which non-liberal countries is life better? He's unable to name them, right? So compared to his imagination, compared to his fantasies, right? Late-stage post-war liberalism is just filled with pathologies, but he's unable to name anywhere that's better. He's unable to name countries that got better institutions. He's unable to name an operating political system that is producing better results. So he lives in a fantasy world like much of the right. And here he is talking about the awesome, terrifying power of the press. I'm not terrified, and I don't think the power of the press is awesome. And I submit to you that the press is going to affect fewer than 0.1% of the vote. So overwhelming is the influence of the press over our politics. This is his writing. That many have described. Oh, so his evidence that press influence is overwhelming, that many have described. You could say that about anything. Many have described that Joe Biden is really an insect. Many have described that Joe Biden is an alien and it's just AI technology. Right? Many have described anything, but this is his basis. This is his foundation for argumentation. Many have described liberal democracies as media-steered regimes. Many have described can account for absolutely anything. It is the weakest form of argumentation. This guy's thought is not even up to a second-grade girl's level of thinking, wherein politicians adopt positions and enact policies calculated above all to secure favorable coverage from journalists. This is an enticing theory. He loves this theory. But I think it understates the role of the media. The press do not drive politics so much as they collaborate in the formulation and implementation of policy. Many media stories are themselves political events. They serve to coordinate and direct the distributed actors of our managerial systems, and they construct an adjusted reality designed not only to confine debate, but also to limit the range of conceivable actions to those which our rulers already favor. So when I talked to Elliot Blatt, he says, look, I see through the bullshit, but 90% of the population, they just don't have my wisdom. They don't have my acuity. They don't have my insight. They don't have my profundity. So I can see through all the bullshit, but 95% of the population, these poor souls, they're unable to make decisions in their own interests. Back to the Substack. It's hard to escape media illusions. Oh, I don't find it hard to escape media illusions. Elliot Blatt doesn't find it hard to escape media illusions. Much of the chat doesn't find it hard to escape media illusions, but I suspect this bloke would contend, oh, I can escape media illusions. It's just that 95% of the population don't have my insights, my intelligence, my profundity, my epistemics. It's very hard to escape media illusions and contemplate the reporting of our journalist class objectively. That is how total their influence is, right? Journalism, the press, right? This dying industry, right? Journalism has been a profoundly dying industry since the late 1980s. Among the most obtrusive features of modern-day journalism, and a great source of its power, is its unrelenting coordination. That's true, right? Whether you're reading the New York Times or some elite German publication, or Haaretz, the elite Israeli newspaper, or Le Monde out of France, they do tend to report the same things in the same way at the same time under similar headlines. And so what? People are just absolutely hopeless and helpless in the face of this kind of reporting. The news media told me to go suck a dog, so I have to go suck off a dog because the New York Times said I had to suck off a dog and Le Monde said I had to go suck off a dog. So who am I, right? How many people do you think would go suck off a dog if the news media told them to? Right? I suggest to you that it is fewer than 0.1% of the population. Right. You got to read Not Born Yesterday, The Science of Who We Trust and What We Believe. Hugo Mercier, cognitive scientist, wrote in his 2020 book. Writers for the Washington Post and Foreign Policy claim Donald Trump was elected thanks to the gullibility of ignorant voters. Common view of Brexit, the vote for Britain to leave the European Union, is to see the Brexiters as uneducated plebs, while those who voted to remain are sophisticated, cultured, and cosmopolitan. Well, what does contemporary academic literature say? The link between unsophistication and credulity takes two forms. The first is in children, whose lack of cognitive maturity is associated with gullibility. And we all know how easy it is to manipulate children into doing what you want them to do, right? All parents have learned very quickly, very easily, without much effort, they can just manipulate their children to consistently behave the way they want. Oh, that claim bears zero association with reality. Right. Parents have a heck of a time getting their children to behave as they want them to do. So the gullibility and lack of a cognitive maturity somehow does not make children easy to manipulate. Right? We've got a psychology textbook assert that children are an advertiser's dream, gullible, vulnerable, and an easy sell. Well, do you know kids? Do you know children? Right? How many children are gullible, vulnerable, and easy sell for their parents' wishes, where the parents can just lead them around like puppets, right? I very rarely see that. Okay, let's get a quick burst here from Jesse Waters.
It's no Joe Biden. They're like, thank you, affordably. Awesome.
Oh, come on, man. Cut out the advertising. Here we go.
What happens when you eat a lot of candy?
What we're witnessing is a sugar high. It's like, the Democrats and maybe some independents are relieved that it's not Joe Biden. They're like, thank God it's somebody. Thank God it's Harris. But what happens with every sugar high? We all crash at the end of it. And they're going to crash once they start dissecting her record.
Joe Biden used to be Washington's favorite candy bar until he expired. So Democrats went out shopping for something sweeter.
Okay, so let's have a look back to Hugo Mercier. Second way in which people lack cognitive sophistication and become incredibly credulous is through a popular division of thought processes into two main types, System 1, System 2. Right? This is the thinking popularized by psychologist Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which Steve Sailer found not much help. Where some cognitive processes are fast, they are System 1, and other processes are slow, those are System 2. 2017, Collins Dictionary designated fake news information that has no basis in fact but is presented as fact, it's word of the year. Right? This decision was a reaction to the abuse of fake news in two events that took place in 2016, the election of Donald Trump to the US presidency and Brexit. In both countries, an overwhelming majority of the elites and the traditional media were surprised and dismayed by people's choices and searched for explanations, and fake news was a common answer. Fake news handed Brexiteers the referendum, was the title of an article in The Independent. Across the Atlantic, the Washington Post ran a piece claiming fake news might have won Donald Trump the 2016 election. Piece in Nature magazine, one of the world's foremost scientific publications, suggested that the biggest pandemic risk was viral misinformation. So, does fake news sway momentous physical, political decisions? Right? Not really. Right? People who want to vote for Donald Trump will go looking for news that supports voting for Donald Trump. They are not going to find such articles in the mainstream media, so they go to what's called fake news websites. Right? People look for support for their views. They will scour the web for their views to justify their decisions. Right? You give Trump supporters accurate information, correcting some of Trump's false statements. Most of them will accept the corrections, but it does not affect in the least their support for Donald Trump. Right? People's support for Donald Trump was not based on false statements. Right? They supported Donald Trump, and then they may or may not accept the false statements. Much political fake news might sound plausible, but a lot of it sounds absolutely ridiculous. All right, 2017, the biggest hit in fake news. Babysitter transported to hospital after inserting a baby in her vagina. 2016 runner-up was woman arrested for defecating on boss's desk after winning the lottery. Right, the most implausible fake news stories, whether or not they are political, spread largely because they are entertaining, and they bring people joy. Right? People who recognize that many of their views were based on false facts are still going to support Donald Trump. Right? There is a demand for justification for how we behave, and as long as there's a demand, some people will rise to fill it. We've always had sensational, entertaining news that had absolutely no basis in reality, and if you don't find it in the newspaper and in the media and online, you will find it in daily conversation. All right, let's try a little bit more from Mark Halperin.
What's different is the vice president is performing at a formidable level, and it's a 90-day sprint. And in a 90-day sprint, if she is as good as this, then what kicks in was always been the case, which is what people said, a normal Democrat will be Donald Trump. What won't be Donald Trump is Hillary Clinton and Jim Comey, or Joe Biden, because of his record on inflation, immigration, and Israel, and because of his infirmity, what I've called the four I's. Kamala Harris now is not just a replacement for Joe Biden, and she's not just someone with some of his baggage and some of her own baggage, but not the infirmity. Right now, she's a really good presidential candidate. She's smiling, she's happy, she's loose. She's dealt with the Israel situation with statements that have been effective, and the press is not clamoring for access or information. At the White House briefing, they asked about her health records. There's people are complaining she's not super accessible. What I hear from Republicans, including serious people, what about the coup? What did she know about Joe Biden's acuity level? Process. Bobby Kennedy did a press call today with a lot of reporters on it. He talked about process too, how hard it is to get on the ballot, et cetera. Process is not going to stop this freight train, I don't believe. And challenging her on race is not going to stop the freight train. But that's what.
So Barack Obama is just as much white as he is black. He could have chosen to identify as white. He chose not to. Kamala Harris is just as much Irish as she is black. So she will, I guess she chooses to identify in whichever way that's most suitable to her own interests.
What he did in a very high profile moment today. All right, let me just talk a little bit more about deep stakes. Oh, by the way, someone just texted me. His comments about J.D. Vance today were not super supportive, but they were supportive enough, but for some. But that's something we need to continue to watch.
If you sent me $2,000, would I get a Trump tattoo? No, I would not. I would not get a tattoo for probably less than $1 million.
As I wrote my newsletter this morning, I think my sense of the deep stakes is it's Shapiro against the field, and that that will definitely be him. But I think he's the most likely based on everything I know. And I've seen in past deepstakes negative stories written about some of the folks, but usually it's more than one. I haven't seen a single negative story about anybody else.
So Israel's been kicking ass. This conversation that I played to you yesterday was recorded before Israel took out two of its biggest enemies. So let me play a little bit more of this conversation here between Gadi Taub, who's speaking immediately, and Michael Duran.
Whole judiciary of the state in order to portray.
So he's not. Your argument is that Ben Caspit is not really trying to protect Israel from the Hague. He's in line. He's aligning himself with the Hague in order to topple Netanyahu.
Yeah, I'll give you a rule of the thumb. Ben Caspit says nothing that, in his estimation, cannot hurt Netanyahu. If he doesn't have anything to hurt Netanyahu with, when he orders a burger, he looks for a burger that he could say is cheaper than the one Netanyahu bought for Sarah on the plane.
I can't play devil's advocate too far, because I tell you win the argument with me on that when you're. But okay, there's probably a lot more to be said about this. One I want to say one little thing, which is just that the Supreme Court in Israel, when it gets involved with these things, you mentioned in passing, I'm not sure that all of our viewers understood, you said that the Supreme Court ordered that they the military couldn't fire on people who came close to the fence. So one of the things that the Hamas did prior to October 7th is it put quote unquote civilians, it pushed them up toward the fence in order to in order to prevent the Israelis from taking military action to push people away from their defensive barrier. And the Supreme Court decided that these kinds of operations designed to push people back were unacceptable. So we need
to be precise on that, because you're right in the essence, but the details are but technically that's not accurate. What happened is there was a parameter, and back in the beginning of the millennium, the 2000s, Doron Almog was the commander of the Southern Theater, and he ordered 1 kilometer from the fence is a death zone. Anyone who enters the death zone is shot in the head and killed. And so human rights organizations began to submit appeals to the Supreme Court that this is not fair, not legal, and so on. And the Supreme Court intervenes in everything in Israel, including things that are purely military. And the thing is, the Supreme Court, what happened is that the Attorney General of the Army kept changing the rules of engagement in relation to what he thought or she thought, depending on what time, would be something acceptable to the court. And they kept changing it. When we got to 2018, right, we're 5 years before the October 7, and then the Hamas is exercising these, they call them the marches of return, where they bring masses of people right up to the fence in exactly long-term planning in order to do what they did. And when these human rights organizations submitted an appeal, I think it was against even shooting them in the leg or something by that stage, the appeals were rejected. So the Supreme Court can say, we didn't accept these appeals.
Right. Okay.
But,
so it's
the bar was so low by then that it was meaningless. So Israelis actually, they all think exactly like you said, and they're right in essence. So this is just another case. We Israelis feel that our court system is working against our national interest on many fronts. And I'll mention one more thing. People began to protest the courts. This is a new thing. So bereaved families who lost their children in this war come to court to read statements, and they interfere. They ask for the right to speak, and then they get up with something written on their phones and read a statement about how their sons and daughters were killed because the court didn't allow soldiers to defend themselves. So there could be different arguments about what the court did, or it didn't allow to deter terrorists and other things. And the judges get up and leave. And this week, one woman spoke to an empty court. And she began, it's heartbreaking. They brought her to the Patriots later. It's heart-wrenching. She stood there and she said, I am talking to an empty wall. And this is how I feel that the court is. You are in an indifferent wall to our pain. I paid this terrible price, and on and on and on. And it's you listen, and I'm telling you, your eyes get wet. It's very
Okay, discussion about media literacy. So it's the same about understanding any text. All right, you have to understand who is producing the text, for whom is it produced, what is the context, what is the incentive structure that it's operating under. So looking at Wikipedia, media literacy is an expanded concept of literacy, the ability to access and analyze media messages, as well as create, reflect, and take action, using the power of information to make a difference in the world. So media literacy applies to different types of media, seen as an important skill for work, life, and citizenship. Well, ask yourself, like, who is saying something? For whom is the message primarily directed? And what's the incentive structure under which the actor or agency is operating? Because we all operate under incentives.
Well, this is what I was driving at, because I think it's interesting. We don't need to talk about it anymore, but I just want to raise the issue, which is that eventually, I think the court is going to recognize that it's this huge power grab it engaged in the 1990s and early 2000s is going to work to delegitimate the law over time, because they're going to be it's happening now. You can see it in what you just said. They are going to be they are making operational policy and operational decisions, and they're going to be held accountable by the public one way or another for those decisions. And they are going to recognize that ultimately their legitimacy is going to be damaged by that, and they're going to pull back. I bet that's going to happen. I'm just making a prediction. We're a long way away from that. But I think saner at some.
Okay, we got a chilling new video from the Trump assassination attempt. All right, and Sean Davis of the Federalist comments, Trump was shot because they let him get shot. New video of the moment before Trump's assassination attempt further shows that it makes zero sense to say the Secret Service simply missed the shooter. He was running across the roof in plain sight. So.
The world will see a vibrant Republican. Great gentleman, so we're going to bring him up for Can we bring him up for a couple of minutes? The world will see a vibrant Republican.
Yeah.
Great gentleman, so we're going to bring him up for Can we bring him up for a couple of minutes?
Yeah, Trump was shot because the Secret Service, right now, it appears they deliberately allowed him to get shot. That's what it looks like. The Secret Service is behaving as though they deliberately allowed him, wanted him to get shot. That's how they're behaving. That's what the evidence indicates right now.
At some point, saner minds are going to realize that the courts shouldn't be just getting into these very, very operational issues.
One way or the other. There's a lot of sense in what you are predicting, but they've gotten accustomed to exercising authority without responsibility for so long, and they have become so arrogant and condescending that their hubris may prevent them from correcting the course and may lead them down the path of ruin, because at some point people will just say, enough of this, I'm not obeying you anymore, and then they will face a collapse of their authority. And partly, and this just before we go to the attack on Majd al-Shams, I just want to mention that the fact that Israelis are mocking the journalists, are making fun of the leftists and their righteous indignation against anarchy after they all did it. As political philosopher Hannah Arendt said, laughter is the most effective way to undermine authority. And I think that the press is losing authority, and you can see it happening in the United States as well, where you see more and more people mentioning to, I don't know, those who praise Kamala Harris now, that Joe Biden has never been sharper. And so
Guys, don't you know that the press has awesome, terrifying power?
and so something is changing.
Yeah. Okay. Mazel Shams. So the issue here is that the Israelis are in a very, very difficult situation. I don't think we can exaggerate how difficult the situation is. And the problem is this: it's because of the offense dominant regime that the Iranians have established with their drones, missiles, and ballistic missiles. And offense dominance, you will forgive me, Gadi, just in case someone hasn't been following us. Offense dominance says, you have a Kevlar vest, it costs $2,000. I have a pistol. I shoot my 6 bullets into your Kevlar vest. Your Kevlar vest stops 5 of them. It's a fantastic interception rate. It's better than the manufacturer says. You can be very proud of your Kevlar vest, but there's 2 problems. One is you're dead because my 6th bullet got through and it hit you. And the other thing is it costs you $2,000 to protect you, and it cost me $12 to shoot those six bullets at you. That's the situation that Israel has, that Iran has against Israel right now, and especially with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has over 150,000 rockets and missiles directed at Israel. Some 10 to 20,000 of those are precision guided. It can overwhelm all of Israel's systems. There's no way that Israel can suppress the fire from Lebanon. There's no way. If it goes to full-scale war, there are going to be thousands and thousands of missiles fired at Israel, at all of its critical national infrastructure. Even at a phenomenal interception rate, there are going to be hundreds of rockets and missiles that are going to hit, and many of them are going to do damage like this one that did in Majd al-Shams. In Majd al-Shams, apparently the alert was sounded, but it wasn't sounded fast enough because unlike the many hours close to the border, so that by the time the alert sounded, the rocket was already hitting. It wants the ceasefire in Gaza, and it hopes that will bring the ceasefire in Lebanon. So Netanyahu, Gallant, Herzl Halevi, they're in a pickle, because they have to, as you mentioned in our opening segment, the alliance with the Druze is such, and not just that, their commitment to the people of the north who have been evacuated from their homes. The commitment to the Israeli public to say, we are defending your homes, we are going to defend the north and get you back to your homes, is such that they have to carry out a significant action against Hezbollah. Their need to reinvigorate their deterrence against the Iranians, against Hezbollah, against Hamas, against the Houthis, means there has to be a significant response. They cannot take this sitting down. The fact that the Americans are putting so much pressure on the Israelis not to escalate means they have to do something significant, because they have to show the enemy that the Americans will not allow the Americans to totally restrain them. So on the one hand, there has to be a significant response. On the other hand, they don't want it to go to major war, because major war probably cannot be won in any kind of simple way at this stage, and the Americans are not there to support them. If you don't have U.S.-Israeli cooperation in the war, it becomes 10 times more difficult. So this is a problem we're in.
And what is, in your estimation, is the calculation of Nasrallah and Hezbollah? What is their view of a possible escalation?
They know exactly where they have the Israelis. They know exactly. Iran Nasrallah, they understand the pickle that I just described, and they are very carefully calibrating their attacks to be
they did not they did not intend to hit children in Manjel Shams. They've been trying to avoid responsibility for that.
Yeah, that was a mistake. That was a mistake. And so what they do when they make a mistake like that, you know, mistakes like this happen in war. The Israelis made mistakes like this. You know, remember the yeah, Kafar Khan, that's during the 2006 you're talking about, but I'm talking about in this war. Remember that?
Okay, got bad news here. New York Times says that some Republicans are embracing conspiracy theories on Trump assassination attempt. Right-wing lawmakers and candidates have made baseless suggestions that the shooting was orchestrated by Democrats or government actors who targeted former President Donald J. Trump. Yeah, so the conspiracy theories regarding the Trump assassination, none of them make sense to me except one, that some part of the Secret Service, some member of the Secret Service, someone with a connection to the Secret Service deliberately allowed substandard security for Donald Trump or actively prevented Donald Trump from achieving proper levels of security. And you can call that a conspiracy theory. It's the only one that I hold to in this assassination, and I'll be very glad to get rid of it and say, it's just incompetence on the part of the Secret Service. But we do know the Secret Service over the past few years has repeatedly denied security resources for Donald Trump events, and the level of incompetence just staggers the mind. So I just find it easier to believe that there was someone associated around the Secret Service who wanted to increase the odds that Donald Trump would get shot. But I may take that back and say, hey, it was just incompetence.
Remember the Israeli hostages who freed themselves and were trying to make their way to the Israeli lines got killed. And you know, people just the other day in Lebanon, or a couple of weeks ago in Lebanon, the Israelis killed a girl by mistake, and so on. So this happens. It happens in every war. There's nothing you can do about it. So what do? If you're Hezbollah and you make a mistake, the first thing you do, you call Amos Hochstein. You get your Lebanese non-Hezbollah minions to call Amos Hochstein and say, tell the Israelis not to escalate. We don't want a major escalation, et cetera, et cetera. And then you bring the Americans to bear. And
so Hezbollah is not interested in a major escalation at this moment, and neither are the Israelis, but Israel.
I find it fascinating that Hezbollah and Iran are far more frightened of escalation than Israel. Israel looks to me like it wants to escalate.
Needs to do something. I'm trying to summarize what you just said. Yeah. So wouldn't everybody be relieved that the American pressure is forcing us to de-escalate? Can I use the Hochstein term?
No, because Israel is losing. Israel is losing because for the first time in the history of the country, territory inside Israel is being contested by Israel's adversaries. And Israel's having to evacuate.
Mike, Israel will start a war with Hezbollah eventually. Have no doubt. I wrote a piece. I think you saw the draft.
Okay, I found one more essay by Eugipius about the terrifying power of the press. Here is his argument. The media shape not so much our views of the world, because of course we can see through the BS, as they do our views of how other people see the world. Well, our views of how other people see the world occur in here, right? We have choices, right? We decide, we make judgments on how we see how other people see. And in this way, the press exercise wide-ranging control over the kinds of arguments and opinions it is even possible to articulate. Well, you have wide open spaces throughout the internet where you can articulate all kinds of arguments and opinions. I do not feel like I am being controlled by the news media. I don't feel like I'm being restricted from the kinds of arguments and opinions that I would like to articulate. So I'm curious, what is it about so much of the right and the dissident right and the new right that is so in love with the idea that they are helpless and that their opposition are huge and terrifying? It just feels to me like a modern version of the Israelites who are unwilling to go into the promised land, and they make up excuses about how the people in the promised land are giants and they're just pygmies in their eyes.
Even before it was published, that said war with Hezbollah is inevitable. The question is of timing. And so and I've said this on television, I sat on a panel where the winds of war were blowing strongly and people are saying we have to now, and this is not the time for calculation. We have to show them that we can be reckless too, and we can send Lebanon back to the Middle Ages and and so forth. And what I said is that this is a complicated major war, and you don't start a war because of an accident. We will have to fight this war, but we have to be ready to fight it, and we shouldn't jump the gun, and it's very difficult. And in this sense, I'm saying that Israel, that the American position may offer everyone a chance to climb down the tree. If is that an expression in English? We say when someone maneuvers themselves in.
Look, bottom line, Israel is eager, ready, close to ready to go to war with Hezbollah, and Israel will go to war with Hezbollah. It may kick off tonight, it may kick off next month, but it is going to kick off, or Hezbollah retreats. Israel will regain authority over the northern part of Israel, and it will not be willing to live with this powerful terrorist neighbor much longer. So there will be war. And I'm tired of the antiseptic news media coverage of this thing that fear grips the world, that there might be an escalation of the war. Well, a lot of different people, a lot of different forces want an escalation of the Middle East conflict, because until you have an escalation so that there is a decisive winner, right, you're just going to have ongoing conflict, right? This thing needs to get settled. You need to have a decisive winner, and then you can start to build